Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Delano D'Souza. Coming up, days after a stampede at the giant Maha Kumbh Mela, some are still looking for missing relatives as the festival continues in northern India. Opinions divided on whether to call for a boycott of the Afghan men's team as the cricketing Champions Trophy approaches in Pakistan. And millions around the world celebrate the Lunar New Year as they usher in the Year of the Snake. In this edition, we tell you what dishes are making their way on the menu. But first, at least 30 people were killed and 60 others injured after a stampede at the Maha Kumbh Mela in northern India. That official tally was released hours after the incident occurred in the early hours of Wednesday morning. Days after the tragedy, some are still looking for their relatives. And despite the best efforts by authorities, hundreds of people wind up lost every day the festival's underway. Navodita Kumari reports.
After 16 hours of journey, the wait of a lifetime for this couple is over.
I feel so good, very peaceful after bathing.
The kind of serenity I feel here, it's a good break from our busy urban life.
The Kumbh Mela is one of the most significant Hindu festivals held every 12 years. Hindus consider immersing in the waters during this festival as an essential religious duty.
It's very important for us. It doesn't clean our sins, it corrects our mentality and makes it positive, which is important for our religion.
It is here that the holy rivers, the Ganga or the Ganges, the Yamuna and the mystical Saraswati meet. And for devotees, this confluence is the most sacred spot to take the holy dip during the Kumbh Mela.
This year, the Hindu nationalist BJP government says 400 million people will be participating in the largest religious gathering in the world, spanning over 6 weeks. Managing such large crowds is a logistical challenge for the authorities. Despite heavy security, the stampede earlier this week couldn't be prevented. At least 30 people lost their lives and over 60 were injured, according to the local government. 2 days later, many relatives are still searching for their loved ones.
We've been to 4 or 5 hospitals now. We've been sent here, but they're not letting us go inside this hospital. We want to check the dead bodies to identify our grandfather.
Apart from the constant fear of stampede in a gathering of this gigantic scale, for families sticking together is not always possible. Many get separated. Authorities have set up 10 lost and found booths. Every day, this booth alone reports at least 300 missing people. Among the most vulnerable are children and the elderly like her.
My granddaughter had bathed. She was still in her wet clothes when suddenly there was a huge rush and I got separated from her. I'm alone. It was just the two of us. I'm now alone. I looked for her everywhere and I haven't been able to find her for 2 days.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has heavily promoted the Kumbh Mela, was scheduled to come here on the 5th of February, but after the stampede, his visit is uncertain.
Now, at the end of February, the world's top cricketing nations will descend on Pakistan for the first edition of the Men's Champions Trophy since 2017. One country taking part for the very first time is Afghanistan. Since the Taliban takeover in 2021, women have been banned from playing cricket in the country, leading to many calling for a boycott of the men's team at the upcoming Champions Trophy. France 24's Leo McGuinn joins us now to discuss this more in detail. Leo, good to see you. Where has this pressure to boycott come from?
Well, this isn't the first major competition that Afghanistan have taken part in since the Taliban takeover, but this is the first time there have been real concrete boycott calls. And as women's rights in the country have become more and more restrictive, those calls to boycott have become louder and louder. So the International Cricket Council regulations state full membership is conditional upon having women's teams and pathway structures in place for those women's teams. However, female participation in sport has effectively been outlawed since that Taliban takeover in 2021. But the Afghanistani men's team have been allowed to participate in tournaments without any sanctions. So at that Champions Trophy, which takes place at the end of February, Afghanistan are in a group with England, Australia and South Africa. In England, there's been a huge amount of pressure for the cricketers to refuse to play their match against the Afghan team on the 26th of February. Nearly 200 politicians, including big names like Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn, have signed a letter calling for England to boycott that match. Many see it as a last option to resort to the sporting stage, since international sanctions clearly haven't had any effect on the Taliban. In South Africa, the country's sports minister has compared the Taliban's treatment of women in the country to the apartheid. He said it would be immoral to look the other way. Interestingly, Australia have twice cancelled series against Afghanistan in the past few years, citing the Taliban treatment of women. But this time, Cricket Australia boss says they certainly won't be boycotting their match. It's their duty to take part.
So are these teams likely to boycott? And if not, what's the argument for playing?
Well, the main argument that comes against the boycott is that the decision shouldn't be left to the teams and the players themselves. It should be the International Cricket Council that makes the decision to put a blanket ban on Afghanistan from competing. Many of the players feel that they've been put in a really awkward position of having to make a political stance. And certainly UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer feels that way. That's the stance he's taken. He's urged the ICC to deliver on their own rules. England Cricket's chief executive, Richard Gould, recently wrote to the ICC calling for more action on what he called a gender apartheid. Both of them have said that a boycott at the Champions Trophy wouldn't be the right decision. They need more concrete action worldwide, similar to the global boycott of apartheid South Africa in the 70s and 80s. We know that Australia have ruled out any chance of pulling out, and in truth, we can say that any chance of any of the three teams boycotting are incredibly slim. England captain Jos Buttler spoke on the matter for the first time recently. He played down any talk of not playing.
Political situations like this, as a player you're trying to be as informed as you can be. The experts know a lot more about it, so I've been trying to stay in dialogue with our managing director and the guides above to see how they see it. I don't think a boycott is the way to go about it.
Now, Leo, is there any precedent for a situation like this in cricket or sport in general?
Cricket actually does have a real precedent when it comes to this. The most famous example being the sporting boycott of South Africa for nearly 20 years up until 1991. But many people forget that cricket was the only sport to actually break that boycott. An unsanctioned England team went on a so-called rebel tour in 1982. It was seen as a really dark moment for English sport and cricket in particular. The 12 players involved were called the Dirty Dozen in the Houses of Parliament. They were subject of global outrage. On the other end of the spectrum, England were actually the only side to boycott during the 2003 World Cup. They were meant to play Zimbabwe in Zimbabwe, but led by captain Nasser Hussain, they decided to forfeit the match in protest of the Mugabe regime. The key difference in those cases, though, is that teams were refusing to go to those countries to play. In this instance, there are no teams travelling to Afghanistan to play. They're facing off in a neutral venue, so the cases aren't exactly the same.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Thank you very much for that, Leo McGuinn there. Now, hundreds of millions of people in Asia and around the world are celebrating the Lunar New Year as they usher in the Year of the Snake. The spring festival underway has kitchens buzzing as elaborate feasts are prepared. Some of the dishes being whipped up go back centuries. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has been taking a look at what's cooking.
A time for feasting with family and leaning into age-old traditions. Lunar New Year means teoguk soup for North Koreans, a delicate broth made with rice cakes, prepared at home and in restaurants around the country.
For the rice cake soup, the main ingredients we use are slices of rice cake, chicken, egg, toasted seaweed, long onions, salt, soy sauce, garlic, ground pepper, and thinly sliced red pepper.
In Vietnam, Ban Chung is on the menu for their New Year's celebration, Tet. It's a glutinous, savoury cake made from sticky rice, green beans and pork belly, which takes 12 hours to make using a wood fire. Tiring work, but the older generation insist on a homemade version.
It feels exciting, joyful. We can buy ready-made bancheng, but it doesn't create that traditional Tet atmosphere.
I want to continue this tradition, but how long I can keep it up is hard to say. Our generation has so many other things to worry about.
And since it's the Year of the Snake, in Hong Kong, customers at Chow Ka Ling's traditional soup restaurant are enjoying a delicacy best eaten in the winter months.
When I eat snake soup, I don't associate it with snake. I just treat it as a kind of meat. I'm not worried about thinking it's poisonous. It just tastes good.
Chow learned how to make the dish from her father in the 1970s, but the woman known locally as the Snake Queen doesn't see much of a future for this acquired taste.
This is not a money-making industry, and so I don't see any young people who'd like to get into it. Even if my own nephews wanted to join me, I tell them to learn to make desserts. No one needs the skill of slaughtering snakes anymore.
Some young people may be squeamish about slurping up this year's zodiac sign in their soup, but for the moment, this ancient Cantonese tradition still has people queuing up for more.
And finally, this Lunar New Year featured a new addition at a folk dance show in the Chinese capital. Traditional dancers were joined on stage by robots, which surprisingly had all the right moves. The cutting-edge technology included artificial intelligence, and it was the second time a group of robots participated at the Spring Festival Gala. Well, that's it for this edition of Access Asia. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.